The house was quiet, almost too quiet. It was the kind of silence that makes you wonder if something was about to shatter. And that's when it happened, just like that. My world, the world I thought I knew, came crashing down. It started like any other day. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the family home. The air smelled of fresh dinner being prepared, the sounds of laughter echoing from the kitchen. But what I didn't know was that this seemingly normal evening would be the start of something I'd never be able to forget. I had always trusted my brother. In a way, we were more than just siblings, we were best friends. We shared everything, our dreams, our fears, our moments of weakness. He was my protector, my ally. I thought we'd always be there for each other. But what I didn't know was that betrayal was already creeping in, silently, beneath the surface. It wasn't until that evening that I felt the cold sting of what he was capable of. I never imagined, never even in my wildest nightmares, that it would come from him. How could I not see it? How did I miss the signs? It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer audacity of it. The person who had always had my back, the one who knew me inside and out, was the very one who would crush my trust in the most unimaginable way. It was like a bomb going off in my chest. The moment I found out the truth, everything, my whole life, was thrown into chaos. But the worst part? He didn't even seem to care. I'm Maya. I grew up in a small town where life felt simple, predictable, and safe. I was just another person in the crowd, nothing special, but to me, my family was everything. My world revolved around them, and most of all, around Adam, my older brother. There was no one else I trusted more. Adam was everything to me. When I was a little girl, I looked up to him like a hero. He was strong, always in control, and had this way about him, like nothing could ever go wrong when he was around. He was the kind of brother who'd make sure no one messed with me. If anyone even dared, they knew Adam would show up, ready to protect me. But as we grew older, things changed. We weren't just brother and sister anymore. We became best friends. We shared everything. My happiest moments were always with him, and when life was tough, it was always Adam who helped me through. But in the back of my mind, I always felt like something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there were moments when I'd catch him looking at me differently, or when he'd act distant. I dismissed it as nothing more than my imagination. After all, this was Adam, my protector, my ally, the person I thought would never hurt me. Adam, my older brother, was everything I had ever wanted to be. He was confident, charismatic, and always knew how to get what he wanted. People respected him, and I admired him for that. He was the leader of our family, the one who took charge in every situation. Growing up, he had the ability to command a room, to make people listen when he spoke. Everyone trusted him. My parents, our friends, even strangers. He was the golden child, and I was proud of it. He was the one I turned to for advice, the one I looked to for strength. I never doubted him, never questioned his motives. That was the kind of person he was, dependable, loyal, and protective. At least that's what I thought. But what I didn't know, what I could never have guessed, was that Adam was hiding something so deep, so dark, that it would destroy everything I thought I knew about him. And when the truth finally came out, it shook me to my core. You see, life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. You think you know the people around you. You think you've seen every side of them. But sometimes, they hide the darkest parts of themselves in plain sight, and you never even notice. It's only when the veil is pulled back, when the truth is finally exposed, that you see the monster beneath the mask. That's what Adam did to me. He pulled back the mask, and all the love I thought we shared was shattered into a million pieces. But even then, I didn't realize just how deep the betrayal ran. Not yet. Not until the truth hit me like a freight train. And so, with a broken heart and a mind full of questions, I had to figure out how to move forward. How do you forgive someone who has destroyed your trust? How do you even begin to rebuild when everything you thought was real was nothing more than a lie? But this wasn't just about my shattered trust. This was bigger than that. This was about justice. This was about finding the strength to fight back and take control of my life again. And that's exactly what I was going to do. This is where the story begins. The moment everything changed for me, and where I had to decide, would I let this betrayal break me, or would I find a way to make things right? Stay with me, because the story doesn't end here. It's only just begun. And trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. It was strange, you know, how life can sometimes feel like a movie. But the twist is always so much worse when it's real. There's no script to follow, no cut to a commercial break where everything is neatly tied up. There's just the cold reality of what you're dealing with. In the days that followed the discovery, my mind was like a storm. I couldn't think straight. Everything seemed jumbled, and the betrayal I'd just learned about. It was almost too much to wrap my head around. It was like I had been standing on solid ground my entire life, and then the earth beneath me just cracked open. I kept asking myself, how could he do this? How could Adam of all people do this to me? It was hard to even say those words out loud. It was like I was betraying myself, as if I were admitting that my instincts had been wrong all these years, that the brother I had loved and trusted with everything was not who I thought he was. I could feel it deep in my chest, this weight, the anger, the hurt, the disappointment. But above everything there was one thought that kept gnawing at me. How could he lie to me so easily? How could he live with me, share laughs and moments of vulnerability, while harboring this dark secret? Adam hadn't just lied to me, he'd made me part of the lie. I wasn't just his sister, I was a pawn in a game that I didn't even know was being played. I kept replaying the moments we shared, looking for signs I had missed. The way he'd sometimes glance away when I asked him about his day. How he'd seemed more distant recently. How he'd brushed off questions with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But it wasn't enough. None of it was enough to warn me of the bombshell that would drop. At first, I tried to push it all out of my mind. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being too emotional. After all, this was my brother, the guy who had always been there for me. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the truth kept creeping back in, filling the spaces I had left empty with doubt. It was almost unbearable. Every time I looked at him I saw the lies. Every word he spoke I questioned. He had always been the person I trusted the most. Now? I wasn't even sure I knew him anymore. The betrayal wasn't just about what he'd done, it was about the way he'd made me feel like I was nothing. He made me think I was safe, that everything between us was unshakable, that no matter what, we would always have each other's backs. But I couldn't even count on him to tell me the truth, the most basic thing a person can offer. There was a feeling of powerlessness that came with it. When someone you love betrays you, it's like you lose a part of yourself. You start to doubt your judgment, your own ability to trust others, to see things clearly. It's as if you're living in a fog, and the world around you feels unfamiliar, untrustworthy. I remember one night, sitting alone in my room, staring at the empty walls. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think. I just sat there, trying to figure out what to do next. How do you confront someone who has broken you in this way? How do you approach them and say, I know what you've done, when you don't even know what to do with the truth yourself? There were so many emotions swirling inside me. Anger, confusion, disbelief. But most of all, there was this overwhelming sense of betrayal. It wasn't just the affair, or whatever you want to call it. It was the fact that Adam had taken something so sacred between us, and turned it into something ugly. He'd destroyed the foundation of trust we'd spent years building. He'd taken my belief in him and shattered it into 1,000 pieces. But I wasn't going to let it end there. The first time I saw him after I learned the truth, I couldn't even look him in the eye. I walked past him like a ghost. I didn't want to acknowledge him. My hands were trembling, my heart was racing, but I couldn't show him any weakness. I wasn't going to let him see how much he'd hurt me. But I knew that I couldn't just let this slide. I had to face him. I had to confront him about what he'd done. It wasn't about getting revenge or trying to hurt him back. It was about holding him accountable. He needed to understand that what he had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a violation. And so I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I would make him see what he had done to me, to our family, and to the trust we'd shared for so long. But more importantly, I needed him to understand the consequences of his actions. The truth needed to be exposed, and the lies needed to be shut down. I wasn't just going to sit back and let him get away with it. The plan formed slowly, like a seed being planted in the back of my mind. I didn't know exactly what it would look like, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let him off the hook. I would make him pay for what he had done, but not in a way that he could predict. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about getting even or making him suffer the way I had. No, this was different. This was about justice, about making sure the truth was laid bare. He had to face the consequences of his actions, and I wasn't going to let him hide behind his charm or his carefully constructed mask any longer. I spent hours thinking about the best way to approach him, the best way to reveal what I knew. I couldn't just confront him blindly. I needed to have all the facts, every little piece. Evidence. Before I said anything. The last thing I wanted was to let him talk his way out of it, to make me feel like I was overreacting or imagining things. So, I began digging. I asked around, I pieced together the fragmented details I had overheard, and I quietly observed him. The more I learned, the more I realized just how deep the betrayal ran. It wasn't just about an affair, it was about everything he had done to cover it up. The lies, the manipulation, the way he had twisted everything to fit his narrative. It was all coming to light, and I had the pieces in my hands. But even then, I wasn't sure what to do with it. How do you handle something this big? How do you confront someone who has been the center of your world for so long, the person who you thought you could count on for everything? One thing I knew for sure was that I wouldn't let it destroy me. I wouldn't let him take everything from me. I had to reclaim my power. I had to find my voice. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The stage was set. The truth was out there. And now, it was time to face Adam. But would he even admit to what he had done, or would he continue to lie, to manipulate his way out of it? The confrontation was coming, and I was ready. But the question was, would I be able to make him see the truth? The days after I had gathered all the information were a blur. I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd made up my mind to confront Adam, to face him, and force him to look me in the eye and admit the truth. But that didn't make it any easier. Every day I'd see him walking around like everything was normal. He was still acting like the older brother I had always known, the charming smile, the easygoing attitude, as if nothing had changed. But to me, everything had changed. And I couldn't just act like it hadn't. I had been carrying the weight of the truth for days now, and every time I looked at him, my stomach twisted. How could he look at me the same way after what he had done? Didn't he feel anything? Didn't he realize that he had destroyed something sacred between us? But Adam was different. He didn't wear his guilt on his sleeve. He didn't seem to show any remorse. He was the same Adam as always, only now I saw him through a different lens. I couldn't unsee the man who had betrayed me, the man who had betrayed our family. And I knew that this couldn't go on any longer. I knew I had to face him, but there was a part of me that was terrified. What would he say? Would he deny everything? Would he apologize, or would he keep lying, pretending like it was no big deal? Would he even feel sorry for what he had done? I kept playing the confrontation over in my mind, rehearsing the words I would say, imagining the moment I would finally call him out on his lies. But there was no script for this. There was no clear path. All I had was the truth, and that was all I needed. I had to make him face it, to make him realize the consequences of his actions. But more than that, I had to make him understand the depth of the betrayal. I had been through so much in the last few days. So many sleepless nights, so much anger, so many tears. And through all of it, there was one thing that kept pushing me forward: justice. This wasn't about punishing him, not really. It was about making sure that the truth came out. It was about making sure that he couldn't hide anymore. And so, on that fateful evening, when everything felt like it had finally come to a boiling point, I knew the time had come. It was like the calm before a storm. The air in the house was thick with tension, and as I walked into the living room where Adam sat, I felt a surge of adrenaline. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking, but I didn't let it show. I had made up my mind. I wasn't backing down. He looked up from his phone when I walked in, his usual confident smile plastered on his face. "Hey, Maya. What's up?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. How could he be so casual? Did he really think nothing had changed? Did he really think that I didn't know? I stood there looking at him, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. The words felt like they were stuck in my throat. But then I reminded myself of everything I had been through, everything I had learned. This wasn't about me being scared. This wasn't about me holding back. It was time to confront him. "Adam," I started, my voice coming out a little shakier than I wanted it to. "I know what you've been hiding. I know what you've done, and I need you to explain yourself." He looked at me, his brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" The casualness was still there, but it was starting to slip. He could sense the change in me. He could feel that this wasn't a conversation he could talk his way out of. "I know about the affair, Adam," I said, each word carrying more weight than the last. "I know everything. And I want you to tell me the truth." His face froze. I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a forced calmness. Maya, you've got it all wrong. There's no affair. I don't know what you're talking about. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after all the lies, after all the evidence, he still denied it. He was still trying to manipulate the situation, trying to make me doubt myself, trying to make me believe that I was just imagining things. But I wasn't having it. Not anymore. No, I said, my voice hardening. You don't get to lie to me anymore. I know the truth, Adam, and you're going to face it. No more running, no more pretending it didn't happen. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see him calculating his next move, weighing his options. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. This wasn't just about me confronting him. This was about holding him accountable for everything he had done, everything he had tried to cover up. I know you think you can talk your way out of this, but you can't, I continued. You've been lying to me, and I can't stand it anymore. I trusted you, Adam, and you betrayed that trust. You betrayed me, and you betrayed our family. His gaze flickered for a second, and for just a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe. But it was gone before I could fully process it. You don't understand, he said, his voice quieter now. It's complicated, Maya. You don't know everything. I shook my head. No, Adam, I know enough. And I'm done listening to your excuses. You've hurt me, and you've hurt everyone who cares about you. But I'm not going to let you do it anymore. The truth is out. It's time to face the consequences. I could see it in his eyes now. The guilt, the shame, the realization that he had lost control. He couldn't lie his way out of this one. There was no manipulation, no charm that could undo what he had done. And just like that, I knew the most important thing. I had finally taken control of the situation. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the one hiding from the truth. I had exposed him for who he really was. But this was only the beginning. What came next would be the hardest part of all. I had to make sure that this betrayal didn't just break me. I had to turn this moment into something that would change everything, for both of us. What happens after this confrontation? What will Adam do when he realizes that the truth cannot be hidden anymore? And how will I move forward from here? Stay tuned, because the next step in this journey will reveal the choices we both have to make. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on both of us. Adam had never been one to shy away from confrontation. He was always quick with a response, ready with a defense, but now he seemed to be lost for words. I stood there looking at him, waiting for something, anything that would explain why he had done what he did, why he thought it was okay to betray me, to betray everything we had shared. But instead, all I got was silence. It wasn't just the affair that bothered me anymore. It wasn't just the fact that he had crossed a line that I thought would never be crossed. It was the lie, the manipulation of my emotions, the way he had twisted everything to fit his narrative. He had built his life on lies, and I had been part of it. Too trusting, too blind to see what was happening right in front of me. I don't want excuses, Adam, I finally said, my voice steady now, no longer shaking with the emotion I had felt moments earlier. I want the truth. I deserve that much. We deserve that much. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly struggling with what to say. For the first time, I saw the cracks in his armor. The confidence that had always been his, the way he commanded every room, was nowhere to be found. It was like he was unraveling in front of me. And part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, wanted to believe that he regretted it, but I knew better now. Maya, this isn't easy, he said quietly, his voice almost pleading. You don't understand. Then make me understand, I shot back. Tell me why. Tell me why you thought it was okay to hurt me like this. Why you thought you could lie to my face for so long. Adam took a deep breath and looked away, unable to meet my eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Don't you dare try to tell me it just happened, I snapped. You planned it, every moment, every word. You knew what you were doing, Adam. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off before he could say anything else. I had spent too long listening to him twist the truth, to his half-hearted apologies and explanations. I didn't want to hear anymore. What I wanted now was to hear him admit the full extent of his betrayal. I wanted him to own up to what he had done, not try to cover it up. Maya, I'm sorry. I really am. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to make things right, he said, the words coming out in a rush. But there was a hesitation in his voice, a lack of conviction that made me doubt the sincerity of his apology. I made mistakes, big ones. But I didn't mean for you to find out this way. For a moment, I wanted to let it go. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe he had learned his lesson, that maybe this was the beginning of some sort of redemption. But I couldn't. The truth was too raw, too painful. And I wasn't going to allow myself to fall for the same tricks again. You want to make it right? I asked, my voice trembling now, but with a different kind of emotion, anger mixed with sadness. Then stop pretending like you're the victim here. You're not sorry, Adam. You're sorry you got caught. The words hit him like a slap. I could see the realization in his eyes, the understanding that I wasn't going to back down this time, that I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into feeling sorry for him. I know you're angry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and I understand why, but I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't mean for things to get this out of hand. But you did, I replied, my voice hardening. You hurt me, and you hurt everyone else who trusted you. You betrayed me, Adam, and I'm done pretending like it doesn't matter. There was a moment of silence between us. A moment where I thought maybe, just maybe, he would finally understand. But then, just as quickly, the old Adam resurfaced. The Adam who could twist his words to make himself sound like the victim. The Adam who could manipulate people into forgiving him, who knew exactly how to get out of trouble. You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? He said, his voice suddenly cold. You think I'm just some kind of monster, that I did all of this on purpose to hurt you. I took a step back, the shock of his words hitting me hard. Is that what you think? That I'm angry because you hurt me on purpose? I shook my head. No, Adam, I'm angry because you took something sacred and tore it apart. You made me feel like I couldn't trust my own brother. You made me question everything. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood there, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. For a brief moment there was something in his eyes. Something like guilt, maybe. But it was fleeting, disappearing as quickly as it came. You have no idea what I've been going through, he said, his voice low. You don't know what it's been like for me. I don't care, I replied sharply. You don't get to make this about you. Not anymore. You've hurt me enough, and I'm done pretending like everything's fine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with tension, the weight of everything that had been said hanging in the room. I could feel the anger boiling inside me, but there was something else too, something I hadn't expected. Pain. Deep, aching pain. I had spent my whole life trusting Adam. He had been my rock, the person I relied on. And now, that trust was gone. That bond we had shared was shattered, and nothing was ever going to be the same again. You're right, Adam finally said, his voice quiet. I messed up, I hurt you, and I don't know how to fix it. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much he had broken me. But I didn't. I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I had spent so long trying to keep my emotions in check, trying to hold it all together. But now I was done. Done pretending. Done holding on to the past. I don't know what comes next, Adam, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But I do know one thing. I'm not going to keep letting you hurt me. I'm not going to keep living in the shadow of your lies. He didn't reply. For the first time, I could see that he didn't have any more words to say. The truth was out there now, and there was no going back. The confrontation wasn't over. I had forced Adam to face the truth, but I still didn't know what came next. Could our relationship ever go back to what it once was? Could I ever forgive him for what he had done? The next step was mine to take, and I knew it would change everything. The silence between us lingered, thick and uncomfortable. I stood there, staring at Adam, trying to process everything that had just been said. It was as if the world had stopped moving for a moment. My body was frozen, caught between anger, sadness, and something deeper, betrayal. I could still feel the sting of his words, and the anger simmering just beneath the surface threatened to overwhelm me, but I didn't want to give in to it. I had spent so long letting my emotions dictate my actions. Now, I needed clarity. I needed to figure out what I was going to do next, because this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something much harder. Adam had taken the first step in acknowledging what he had done. He had finally admitted to me, in some form, that he had messed up. But I knew that wasn't enough. I wasn't looking for an apology. Apologies were hollow when the damage had already been done. No, I needed more than that. I needed him to understand the weight of what he had done. I needed him to understand that this wasn't something we could just brush off, something we could move past like it was no big deal. There was no going back. Our relationship, the trust we had shared, had been irreparably broken. And yet, as I stood there, staring at my brother, the same brother I had once relied on for everything, a part of me wondered if there was still a way forward. Could I forgive him? Could I ever look at him the same way again? I didn't know the answer. But I did know one thing. I couldn't move on without confronting the reality of what had happened. Adam, on the other hand, seemed to retreat into himself. His face had gone pale, and he was still standing there, avoiding my gaze. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But then I remembered everything, the lies, the secrecy, the manipulation. This wasn't about pity. This was about accountability. "I can't fix this," Adam said quietly, almost as though he were speaking to himself. "I can't undo what I've done. I've hurt you in a way that I never thought was possible." "You can't undo it," I said softly, the weight of his words settling into my chest. "But you can stop pretending it's nothing. You can stop pretending like everything is okay. It's not, Adam, and it won't be until you face the full truth of what you've done." There was a pause, a long stretch of time that felt like hours. Adam seemed to shrink under the intensity of my gaze, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of his actions had finally started to hit him. For the first time, he looked like a man who had lost everything. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, the vulnerability in his voice barely audible. "I don't know what I can do to make this right." "I'm not asking for you to make it right," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "You can't fix this, Adam. No one can. But you can stop pretending like it didn't happen. You can start being honest, not just with me, but with yourself." He looked up then, meeting my gaze for the first time in what felt like forever. There was something in his eyes, something raw, something I had never seen before. It was as if the facade had finally cracked, and I could see the man behind it, the one who had been hiding his flaws, his mistakes, from the world, from me. "Maybe I've been lying to myself," Adam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I've been pretending that everything was fine. But it's not. And I don't know how to fix it." "You can start by being honest," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And then you can figure out what you need to do. But don't expect me to just forget. Don't expect me to act like nothing happened. Because something did." There was a long silence, a moment of reckoning where Adam seemed to truly grasp the magnitude of what had transpired. The weight of the truth was suffocating, and for the first time I saw that he understood. He understood that this wasn't just about the affair. It was about the years of lies, the manipulation, the deception. It was about everything he had hidden from me, everything he had hidden from himself. "I can't make you forgive me," Adam said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I will do whatever it takes to make this right. If you'll let me." For the first time I allowed myself to feel the smallest flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. Not together, not in the way we once were, but in a way that acknowledged the pain, the betrayal, and the brokenness. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Adam," I admitted, my voice quiet. "But I'm not going to let this break me. I can't. Not anymore." And with that, the conversation seemed to come to a natural end. I stood there, staring at my brother, both of us silent for a long moment. The truth was out there now. There was no turning back. But the path forward was unclear. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in the shadow of this betrayal. I had to take control of my own life, even if that meant walking away from everything I had ever known. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to avoid Adam as much as possible, not because I hated him. I didn't know if I could ever hate him. But because I wasn't sure I could trust myself around him. The emotions were too raw. Every time I saw him, I was reminded of the pain, the disappointment, and the feeling that I had lost something I could never get back. But as much as I wanted to escape it, the truth kept following me. It kept coming back in waves. Memories, conversations, moments that now felt tainted. I couldn't just erase it. I couldn't just pretend it didn't matter. So, I started focusing on myself. I didn't know what else to do. I took time away from the family. Time to process what had happened. Time to figure out who I was and what I wanted. But no matter how hard I tried, the question kept haunting me. Could I ever forgive him? Could I ever move past the betrayal, knowing that he had been the one to shatter my world? As the days passed, I realized something. This wasn't just about forgiving Adam. It was about forgiving myself. Could I find a way to heal? Could I find a way to move on from the betrayal without letting it define me? The next step was mine to take, and it was going to be harder than anything I had faced before. The days that followed were heavy. Every moment seemed to drag on, as if time itself had become a constant reminder of what had happened. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. The pain, the betrayal, it was always there, lurking in the background, refusing to let me forget. I had spent so much of my life trying to protect my brother, trying to be there for him when he needed someone. I had always believed that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water. But now, as I sat alone in my room, the weight of the truth was suffocating me. Adam had shattered everything I had believed in, and I didn't know if I could ever pick up the pieces again. I hadn't spoken to him since our confrontation. The silence between us had become unbearable, but I didn't know what to say. How could I even begin to speak to him when everything felt so broken? He had hurt me in a way that I never thought was possible, and yet here I was, struggling with what to do next. I had spent the first few days after the confrontation trying to avoid Adam. I couldn't look at him without feeling this overwhelming mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. The emotions were too raw. Every time I saw him, I was reminded of the lies, the secrets, the things he had kept from me. How could I ever trust him again? How could I even begin to imagine a future where things could go back to normal? But as the days turned into weeks, I realized that avoiding him wasn't helping. It wasn't making the pain go away. It wasn't making the anger subside. It wasn't making me feel any better. I needed to face it. I needed to face him, and I needed to face myself. The decision to confront him again wasn't an easy one. In fact, it felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. But I knew I couldn't keep living in this limbo, caught between the past and the present. I had to make a choice. Was I going to let this betrayal destroy me, or was I going to find a way to heal? I spent hours thinking about it, replaying every moment, every word, every look. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't keep holding on to the past. As much as it hurt, as much as I wanted to keep pretending like things were fine, they weren't. They would never be the same again. And maybe that was okay. I couldn't change what Adam had done, but I could change how I responded to it. I could choose to heal, to move on, to take control of my own life again. And that meant I had to stop holding on to the anger, the resentment, the bitterness that had been consuming me. It meant I had to forgive him. Not for him, but for me. But forgiveness wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be something that came overnight. It wasn't going to be some magical moment where everything suddenly clicked and all the pain disappeared. No, it was going to be a process. It was going to take time. But I was willing to try. I was willing to take that first step. I found myself standing in front of Adam's door one afternoon, my hand hovering over the doorknob, unsure of what to do next. I had come this far, but I still wasn't sure if I was ready. I had spent so long building up this wall between us, this barrier to protect myself from the pain. But now, I had to let it down. I had to allow myself to feel the hurt, to let the tears flow, to finally let go of the weight I had been carrying for so long. I knocked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. There was no response at first, and for a moment I wondered if he was even home. But then, I heard footsteps approaching, and the door opened slowly, revealing my brother. His eyes were red, as though he had been crying, and his face was etched with guilt and regret. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, silently, the tension between us thick and heavy. Finally, Adam broke the silence. "Maya, I'm sorry." The words were soft, almost pleading, but they carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. I could see it in his eyes. He was hurting. He had been hurting for a long time, even before everything came to light. And maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to understand the depth of the damage he had caused. "I don't know what to say anymore," he continued, his voice cracking. "I've done so many things I regret. I've lied to you, I've hurt you, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "You can't fix it, Adam," I said quietly. "You can't undo the past, but I need you to understand what you've done. I need you to understand how much it hurt me, how much it hurt everyone who trusted you." "I know," he whispered, his voice full of remorse. "And I'm so sorry. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I'm here, Maya. I'm here, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The words seemed to catch in my throat. I had spent so much time trying to protect myself from the pain, trying to keep myself from falling apart. But now, standing there in front of my brother, I realized something. I realized that I couldn't keep pretending like nothing had happened. I couldn't keep living in this state of anger and resentment. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, but I'm not going to let this control my life anymore. I'm not going to let your mistakes define who I am. Adam looked at me, his face filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. I understand, he said softly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll be here, no matter what. I'll be here, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I nodded slowly, my heart heavy. I don't know what comes next, Adam. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. But I'm willing to try, in my own way. I just need time. I understand, he said again, his voice filled with gratitude. I'll give you all the time you need. But just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. And just like that, the tension between us began to ease. The walls I had built up, the anger and the hurt didn't disappear overnight, but they started to crumble. I wasn't sure if I could ever fully trust Adam again. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this betrayal destroy me. I wasn't going to let it define who I was. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But I was ready to face it. I was ready to rebuild, not just my relationship with Adam, but my own life. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to forgive, not for him, but for me. The road to healing was just beginning. Forgiveness, trust, and reconciliation were all on the horizon. But there were still many questions to be answered. Could I rebuild what had been lost? Could Adam truly change? And how would I move forward, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again? The days after my conversation with Adam were unlike any I'd ever experienced. There was a strange stillness that hung in the air, a quietness that settled deep in my chest. I could feel the weight of the situation, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was like a fog that slowly began to clear. I wasn't drowning in anger anymore. I wasn't suffocating under the pain of betrayal. But I also wasn't sure where to go from here. What I knew, more than anything, was that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I couldn't keep avoiding Adam, couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. I had to make a choice. Not for him, but for myself. Forgiveness. It was the word I kept coming back to, the word that seemed to hold so much power. But what did forgiveness even mean in a situation like this? Could I forgive Adam for what he'd done? Could I find a way to move on, knowing the truth, knowing how deeply he had hurt me? And if I did forgive him, what would that even look like? Was it about pretending like nothing had happened? Or was it about accepting the truth and learning to live with it? I spent days lost in these thoughts, unable to shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust had been shattered. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't keep holding on to the anger. I had to find a way to heal, even if it meant accepting that some things could never be the same again. It wasn't just about Adam anymore. It was about me. I had to learn to forgive myself too. I had to stop blaming myself for what had happened. I had to stop wondering if I had missed the signs, if I had somehow failed to see what was right in front of me. I had spent so much time thinking about the things I could have done differently, the things I could have said, that I had forgotten to focus on the one thing I could control, my own healing. And so, I began the slow process of rebuilding. I took it one day at a time, knowing that it wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward, even if just a little bit. I started by reconnecting with myself. It had been so long since I had focused on my own needs, my own wants. I had been so wrapped up in trying to hold things together, in trying to fix what was broken, that I had lost sight of who I was. I started doing things I hadn't done in years, things that brought me joy, things that reminded me of the person I used to be before everything fell apart. I went for long walks, read books I had forgotten about, and spent time with people who made me feel like I wasn't defined by the mistakes of others. I also took time to reflect on what had happened, what it all meant, and how I could move forward. It wasn't about letting Adam off the hook. It wasn't about erasing the pain he had caused. It was about understanding that I couldn't keep carrying this weight around forever. I had to let go of the anger, the resentment, the need for revenge. I had to make peace with what had happened, even if I didn't have all the answers. I started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me make sense of the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling. I had always been hesitant to talk to someone about my problems, but I quickly realized how much I needed it. I needed a space where I could process everything, the betrayal, the hurt, the confusion, and start to make sense of it all. It wasn't a quick fix. Therapy wasn't a magic solution to the pain, but it helped. Slowly, I began to understand that healing wasn't a straight path. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something that took time, patience, and self-compassion. As I began to heal, I also started to think about my relationship with Adam. Was I ready to forgive him? Could I ever trust him again? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't keep avoiding him. I couldn't keep pretending like he didn't exist. We were family, and no matter how broken things had become, I needed to find a way to coexist with him in this new reality. I reached out to Adam after a few weeks of distance. The conversation wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. We had to talk, to be honest with each other about where we were, about what we needed from each other moving forward. The first time we spoke again, I could hear the tension in his voice, the hesitation, the uncertainty. But he didn't shy away from it. He didn't try to excuse his actions. He simply listened, and for the first time, I felt like he understood the gravity of what he had done. "I've spent the last few weeks thinking about everything," Adam said, his voice soft but steady. "And I know I can't undo it. I can't change what happened. But I want you to know that I am truly sorry. I know I hurt you in a way I can never take back." "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't think I can ever forget Adam. But I'm trying to heal. I'm trying to move forward." "I know," he said, his voice full of regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm trying to be better, for myself, for you, for everyone." It wasn't perfect. There were still so many things left unsaid, so many emotions that hadn't been processed. But it was a start. It was a step in the right direction. Adam had acknowledged his mistakes, and I had begun to see the sincerity in his words. But more importantly, I had begun to see that healing wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about wiping the slate clean and pretending like everything was fine. It was about understanding that life was messy, and sometimes the only way to move forward was to acknowledge the hurt, face the truth, and give yourself permission to let go. In the weeks that followed, we took small steps toward rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always comfortable, but we were both trying. I was trying to heal, and he was trying to make amends. It wasn't a perfect process, and it wasn't without setbacks, but I was learning to let go of the anger, to forgive him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what he had done. It wasn't about pretending that everything was okay. It was about choosing to free myself from the weight of the past. It was about giving myself permission to move on, to rebuild, to find happiness again. And I was beginning to understand that it was a choice I had to make every single day. I had spent so long holding on to the pain, to the betrayal, to the anger. But now, I was choosing to let go. I was choosing to heal. I was choosing to take control of my own life again. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer defined by what had happened. I was no longer defined by my brother's mistakes. I was defined by my own strength, my own ability to rise above the hurt, and my own determination to find peace. As I continued on my journey of healing, I realized that the path to forgiveness was long and winding. There would still be moments of doubt, moments where I wondered if I was making the right choice. But with each step forward, I was reclaiming my power, reclaiming my life. The question remained: could I ever fully trust Adam again? Could we rebuild our relationship, or had the damage been done? Only time would tell. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself grappling with something I hadn't expected. Despite the steps I had taken to heal, despite the conversations with Adam and the distance I'd tried to give myself from the past, there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. I had done everything I could to forgive Adam, to accept the reality of our situation, but there were times when I found myself wondering if I was just fooling myself. Was it possible to truly move forward from something so painful? Or was I simply sweeping the emotions under the rug, pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't? Every time I thought I had come to terms with what had happened, something would remind me of the betrayal. A song on the radio, a conversation between friends, or even just a passing thought would drag me back into the darkness. It was like being stuck in a never-ending cycle, and the more I tried to break free, the harder it became. I thought I was past it. I thought that the anger, the hurt, would eventually fade, and I would be able to look at Adam and see the brother I once knew. But the truth was, every time I saw him, I was reminded of the pain. I was reminded of the betrayal, the lies, the way he had destroyed the trust I had in him. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore it. I began to pull away again. I spent more time alone, lost in my thoughts, unsure of how to move forward. I'd wake up every morning with the same question swirling in my mind. Can I ever truly forgive him? Can I rebuild what we once had? And most painfully, can I trust him again? I didn't have the answers. I didn't even know if I wanted the answers. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe the person I was trying to rebuild wasn't the same person I had been before everything fell apart. Maybe I wasn't supposed to go back to who I was. Maybe, instead of rebuilding the old version of myself, I needed to create something new. But that wasn't an easy realization to come to. It wasn't easy to accept that the person I had been, the person who had been so trusting, so hopeful, was gone. The world I had known was no longer the same, and that left me feeling empty, adrift, like a ship without a rudder. I tried to distract myself, focusing on work and personal projects. I pushed myself to be busy, to keep moving forward, but the emptiness was always there, lurking in the background. I had learned to put on a smile for the world, to pretend like everything was fine, but it was exhausting. I was tired of pretending. I was tired of living with the weight of all these emotions and not knowing how to let them go. One day, as I sat alone in the park, watching the leaves fall from the trees, I realized something. I had spent so much time focusing on what had happened to me, focusing on the betrayal and the hurt, that I had lost sight of who I was becoming. I had been so focused on Adam and the pain he had caused that I hadn't given myself the space to grieve, to heal, and to grow. I had spent so much time trying to fix everything, trying to make everything okay, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I had been living in the shadow of Adam's mistakes, letting his actions dictate my emotions and my self-worth. But I couldn't keep doing that. I couldn't keep letting someone else's actions define me. I had to start taking ownership of my own life again. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't something that came overnight. But as I sat in that park, I made a vow to myself. I would no longer let Adam's betrayal control my life. I would no longer be consumed by the anger, the hurt, the pain. I would find a way to heal, but on my own terms. I would find a way to forgive, but not for Adam. This time, I was forgiving for myself. That night, I sat down with a journal and began writing. I hadn't written in months. The words had felt too heavy, too personal, but now they seemed like the only way to release all the emotions I had been bottling up inside. I poured my heart out, letting the pain and the anger flow onto the pages. I wrote about my memories with Adam, the good and the bad. I wrote about the trust I had placed in him and the devastation I felt when it was broken. I wrote about the anger that still simmered beneath the surface and the confusion about what came next. It wasn't easy. The tears came and the pain resurfaced, but something about putting my thoughts on paper made it feel more real, more manageable. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control. I was giving myself the space to feel, to grieve, to process. I wasn't ignoring my emotions anymore. I was letting them in. The next day, I met with Adam again. This time, it felt different. The air between us wasn't thick with tension. It wasn't filled with anger or resentment. It was just honest. We sat down in the same living room where we'd had our first conversation after the betrayal. And this time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't holding on to the pain. I had let it go, or at least I was trying to. Adam, I said, my voice steady. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us, about what happened. He nodded, his eyes searching my face. He looked like he was bracing for something, for whatever I was about to say, and I couldn't blame him. He knew what I had been through, what I was still going through. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, I continued, but I'm learning to forgive. Not for you, but for me. I'm tired of holding on to this pain. I'm tired of letting it control me. Adam's expression softened, and I could see the relief in his eyes. He hadn't expected forgiveness, but hearing me say the words seemed to mean something to him. It was a moment of understanding, a quiet recognition that we both had a long road ahead of us. "I know I don't deserve it," he said quietly. "But thank you. Thank you for trying." "I'm not trying to fix everything, Adam," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I'm just trying to heal, and part of that healing is accepting what happened, but also moving forward. I can't keep looking back. I can't keep living in the past." And with that, the air between us lightened, just a little bit. We both knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, and there would be moments where the pain resurfaced. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. I wasn't expecting perfection, and neither was he. But we were both willing to try, and that, at least, was something. But the journey wasn't over. As I continued to navigate my healing process, there were still so many questions, so many unresolved emotions. Could Adam truly change? Could we rebuild trust, or had the damage been done? And most importantly, could I ever find a way to trust myself again? It had been weeks since that conversation with Adam. Weeks of quiet, subtle change. Nothing drastic, but little by little, I began to feel different, stronger in ways I hadn't expected. It was as if I was shedding layers of myself that had been built around anger, hurt, and betrayal. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, I felt like I was taking the first real steps toward recovery. But healing, as I had learned, wasn't linear. It wasn't about waking up one day and suddenly feeling better. It was about the process, the ups and downs, the moments of progress, and the inevitable setbacks. There were days when I felt hopeful, when I truly believed that forgiveness was within reach, and then there were other days when the anger came rushing back, when the hurt would resurface, and I felt like I was back at square one. Trust, as I had discovered, was fragile. It wasn't something you could just rebuild overnight. And even though Adam had apologized and promised to do better, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. I had spent so long building my life around the idea of family, that blood was thicker than water, that the people you loved were the ones who would never betray you. But Adam had shattered that illusion. I had trusted him with everything, and he had taken that trust and broken it into a million pieces. How could I ever fully trust him again? How could I trust anyone again? As I grappled with these questions, I found myself withdrawing once more. I spent more time alone, reading, reflecting, and trying to figure out who I was without the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. I couldn't avoid Adam forever, but I also couldn't pretend like everything was fine. I needed time. I needed space to heal, to figure out how to move forward. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I ran into Maya's old friend Sarah. We hadn't spoken in months, since before everything went down with Adam. Sarah had always been a close friend, someone I confided in during difficult times, but after the betrayal, I had pulled away from everyone. I hadn't wanted to burden anyone with my pain, so I kept everything to myself. "Hey, Maya," she called out, a warm smile on her face. "It's been a while, huh?" I smiled back, though I could feel a knot in my stomach. It felt strange to see her again after so long, to feel like I was living in a different version of my life. "Yeah, it has," I replied, shoving my hands into the pockets of my jacket. "I've just been dealing with some stuff." "I get it," she said, her expression softening. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I'm here for you. Always." I took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. The last few months had made me realize just how much I had been shutting people out. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop doing that. Maybe it was time to lean on the people who still cared about me. I needed support, even if it felt uncomfortable. "I know," I said quietly. "It's just been hard, with Adam and everything. I don't even know where to begin." Sarah nodded. "You don't have to have it all figured out. It's okay to not know, just take it one day at a time." For the first time in a long while, I felt a small sense of relief. It was comforting to know that someone was there, someone who wasn't judging me, someone who understood that I was doing the best I could. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I spent more time together. We went for walks, had coffee, and talked about everything under the sun. Except Adam. I wasn't ready to dive into the depths of what had happened. Not yet. But just being around someone who understood, who was there for me without judgment, was helping in ways I couldn't fully explain. And then, one evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I called Adam. The conversation we had was difficult, to say the least. He was still trying to make amends, still trying to prove that he was truly sorry. But as we talked, I realized something. Adam had changed. He was trying. He wasn't perfect, and he would never be. But he was making an effort. "I know I've hurt you, Maya," he said, his voice quiet but full of sincerity. "And I know that I can't fix it. I just want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to be a better person. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that I'm trying." I listened, my heart a little less heavy with each word. I could hear the remorse in his voice, and for the first time I believed him. I believed that he truly understood the depth of the pain he had caused, and that he was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. But at the same time, I realized that the process of healing wasn't just about Adam. It was about me, too. It was about finding my own way forward. "I'm not sure what comes next, Adam," I said finally. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, but I'm willing to try. Not for you, for me. I can't keep living in the past. I need to move forward, and I need to figure out how to do that." The silence between us was long but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after understanding has been reached. "I'm here, Maya," he said softly. "Whenever you're ready. I'm not going anywhere." The next few months were a blur of slow progress. I didn't rush anything. I took my time. I was learning that healing wasn't about forcing things, wasn't about checking things off a list. It was about being gentle with myself, about allowing myself to feel everything without judgment. Some days I felt strong, other days I felt broken. But that was okay. That was part of the process. I began to rebuild my trust in Adam piece by piece, but it wasn't easy. It required a lot of patience, and not just with him, but with myself. There were moments when I doubted whether I could ever fully trust him again, whether we could ever go back to being the way we once were. And there were other moments when I saw glimpses of the brother I had known and loved. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And for the first time, I saw him as a person, not just as the source of my pain, but as someone who was capable of change. We began spending more time together, but this time, it was different. The dynamic had shifted. There was no going back to the past, no pretending like nothing had happened. But we were finding a new way forward, one that didn't erase the hurt, but one that allowed us to rebuild our relationship with honesty and understanding. The journey of healing was far from over. I had taken the first step toward forgiveness, but there was still so much more to learn. Could I fully trust Adam again? Could we rebuild our relationship, or had the damage been done? I didn't know the answers yet, but I was starting to understand that the path forward wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it and learning to live with it. Months had passed since the moment I'd decided to truly start healing. The decision to forgive, to let go of the pain that had dominated my life for so long, had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. But it was also the most freeing. The weight that had once crushed my chest had started to lift, inch by inch. I could breathe again, I could think again. But healing wasn't a destination. It wasn't a place I could reach and say, "I'm done, I'm whole again." No, it was an ongoing journey. One day I would feel like I had conquered the past, and the next, the ghosts of betrayal would sneak up behind me, reminding me that there were still pieces of me left unhealed. Still, I had made progress. I could feel it in the way I carried myself, in the way I walked through the world. It wasn't the same, and it never would be. But it was different, and for now, that was enough. I had made the choice to rebuild my relationship with Adam, but I had also learned that rebuilding doesn't mean going back to what it once was. I had spent so many years imagining that things between us were perfect. Too perfect to ever be torn apart. I had put him on a pedestal, trusting him blindly, never questioning his actions. But the truth was, there were no perfect relationships. There were only people, with flaws, with mistakes, with pain. And as much as I hated to admit it, Adam had shown me something valuable. He had shown me that it was okay to be flawed. It was okay to make mistakes. What mattered was what you did after. What mattered was whether you were willing to learn from those mistakes, whether you were willing to own up to the pain you had caused, and do whatever it took to make amends. And Adam had tried. I had to give him credit for that. He hadn't disappeared when things got hard. He hadn't run from the consequences of his actions. Instead, he had stayed. He had stayed and fought for my forgiveness. And for the first time, I could see that he was someone who was genuinely trying to change. But that didn't mean everything was easy. It didn't mean that forgiveness was instant. It didn't mean that I could just forget the pain and pick up where we left off. No. It meant that I had to decide every single day to let go of the anger, to let go of the past, and to give him a chance to prove that he was worthy of my trust. The hardest part was trusting myself again. Could I trust my judgment? Could I trust myself to make the right decisions? The doubt was always there, lurking beneath the surface. I wondered if I would ever fully trust anyone again, if I would always question motives, if I would always second-guess the people closest to me. But I didn't have the answers. And maybe that was okay. Maybe it was okay to not have it all figured out. Maybe it was okay to take things one day at a time, to allow myself to be vulnerable, to learn to trust again, even if it meant risking the possibility of getting hurt. One afternoon, as I sat in my favorite cafe, sipping a warm cup of tea, I had a moment of clarity. I had spent so much of my life trying to hold on to what I thought I had, trying to fix what was broken. But the truth was, nothing could ever be the same. The past had been shattered, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't put the pieces back together in the same way. But that didn't mean I couldn't create something new. That didn't mean I couldn't rebuild my life, piece by piece, into something even stronger. It didn't mean I couldn't find a way to move forward, to reclaim my sense of self, my sense of peace. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't just about Adam. It was about me, too. It was about accepting that I wasn't perfect, that I had made mistakes, and that sometimes life doesn't go the way you want it to. It was about learning to let go of the pain, not because it didn't matter, but because I couldn't let it consume me. And so, I made another decision. I decided to stop hiding from my feelings. I decided to stop running from the anger, the hurt, and the fear. I decided to face them head on, to feel everything I needed to feel, and then to let it go. I wasn't going to bury my emotions anymore. I wasn't going to keep pretending like I was fine when I wasn't. I was going to embrace the process of healing, even if it wasn't perfect, even if it didn't happen overnight. I reached out to Adam again, this time with no agenda, no expectation of a specific outcome. I just needed to talk, to reconnect on a deeper level, without the weight of the past constantly hanging over us. When I called him, I could hear the nervousness in his voice, but there was also a quiet hope. He had been patient, giving me the space I needed, but I could tell that he was ready to move forward too. "Maya," he said when I answered, his voice soft but sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about moving forward. I want that too. I want to prove to you that I'm worth the second chance, but I also know that it's not going to be easy. And I'm willing to do the work. I'll be here no matter what." His words, simple as they were, carried so much weight, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "I'm not sure what the future holds, Adam," I said, my voice steady but full of vulnerability. "But I'm willing to try too, not for you, for me. I need to move forward, but I also need to do it on my own terms. We can't go back to what we were, but maybe, just maybe, we can build something new." The relief in his voice was palpable. "I'm ready, Maya. I don't expect everything to be perfect, but I'm ready to rebuild with you. Slowly, one step at a time." And that was the moment I realized that maybe we didn't need to rebuild what we once had. Maybe we just needed to build something new, something stronger, something built on honesty, on vulnerability, and on the willingness to grow. In the weeks that followed, Adam and I continued to navigate this new territory. We didn't rush it, we didn't force anything, we simply gave each other space to be who we were, to heal at our own pace, and to find a way to reconnect without the pressure of trying to recreate the past. I also began to focus more on myself. I'd started therapy again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't about dealing with the pain of betrayal. It was about understanding myself, my patterns, and the ways in which I had been holding on to old wounds. It was about learning how to trust myself again, how to set boundaries, and how to put myself first without feeling guilty. I spent time with friends, rekindled old hobbies, and rediscovered the joy of doing things for myself. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I was slowly but surely reclaiming my life, piece by piece, and with each step forward I felt stronger, more empowered. The road ahead wasn't easy, and there were still many challenges to face. But as I continued on my journey, I realized that the most important thing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning from it, about becoming stronger in the face of adversity, and about embracing the uncertainty of the future. What would happen next? Could Adam and I rebuild our relationship, or would we both continue down separate paths? Time would tell. But one thing was certain: I was ready to face whatever came next. The days blurred together in a strange mixture of progress and setback. There were moments when I felt light, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. But then, just as quickly, the old pain would creep back in, and I would find myself retreating to the familiar comfort of my solitude, trying to figure out who I was now. In the weeks since Adam and I had started to rebuild, I discovered something profound about the healing process. It wasn't linear. Some days felt like breakthroughs, where we could finally talk openly, laugh together, and feel like we were moving forward. But other days, the distance between us seemed impossibly wide, as if the betrayals of the past were still too fresh to overcome. The hardest part, however, wasn't necessarily about what Adam had done. It was about the way my own identity had been shaken to the core. Before everything had happened, I had been Maya, the sister who loved fiercely, who trusted easily, who believed in the inherent goodness of people. But now, I felt fractured. Part of me still longed for the old, unbroken version of myself, the one who never questioned her family, who didn't second-guess every word spoken, every gesture made. But I also knew that version of me was gone. And maybe that was okay. In some ways, I felt like I was learning to live again. I was rediscovering who I was, not just as Adam's sister, but as Maya, the individual. I had spent so much of my life trying to hold the pieces of others together, trying to make sure that everyone was okay, that I had neglected myself. Now, I was learning to put myself first, to trust my own judgment, and to live authentically. But it wasn't easy. There were days when the sadness and the doubt crept in, when I questioned if I was even capable of trusting anyone ever again. I wondered if I would always carry the scars of this betrayal, and if so, what would that mean for me? That's when I realized something else. Healing isn't just about moving on, it's about integrating the past with the present. It's about acknowledging the hurt, but also allowing yourself to grow beyond it. It's about accepting that you don't have to be perfect, that the road ahead doesn't have to be without pain. What mattered was how I chose to navigate that pain. And in the midst of all this, Adam and I were finding a new way to relate to each other. Our relationship had shifted, and while it would never go back to the way it had been before, we were learning to navigate this new reality together. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Adam came and sat next to me. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt calm, where the weight of the past didn't feel so heavy. "I've been thinking," Adam said softly, his voice hesitant, "about everything, about what we've been through." I turned to look at him. He had that look on his face, the one that still showed vulnerability, the one I had only started to see in him after everything had come to light. The confident, charming Adam I had once known was still there. But there was something new now, something humbling, something more real. "I know this hasn't been easy," he continued, "and I don't expect it to be. But I've been working on myself, trying to be better, not just for you, but for me too. I want you to know that I'm not running from this. I'm not running from the pain I caused." I nodded, my heart still heavy but no longer overwhelmed by anger. "I know you're trying, Adam, and I can see that. But trying doesn't always fix things. I can't just forget what happened, and I can't pretend like it didn't matter. But I'm learning too. I'm learning how to heal, how to let go of the anger, how to trust again." He looked at me with a kind of understanding I hadn't expected. "I don't want you to forget. I don't want you to pretend like it didn't matter. I just want to be here for you, and I want to rebuild whatever we can." The sincerity in his words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the same Adam I had once known, the one who swept through life with a charming smile, hiding behind bravado and easy answers. This was the Adam who had seen the consequences of his actions, the Adam who had realized that what had happened couldn't be undone. And while that didn't erase the past, it was a step toward a different future. A future that didn't have to be built on lies or manipulation. "I want that too," I said softly. "But I also need to take it slow. I need to rebuild my own life. I need to figure out who I am without all of this weighing me down." He nodded, understanding without needing an explanation. "I get it. And I'm here, whenever you're ready." As the weeks passed, I began to realize that the more I let go of the anger, The more I allowed myself to breathe, the more space I created for new beginnings. It wasn't just about Adam, it was about me reclaiming my own power, my own sense of self. I had spent so long trying to fit into the idea of what my family was supposed to be, trying to make everyone else happy, that I had lost touch with who I was outside of that. Now, I was learning to find that balance again. The hardest thing, though, was the trust. Adam wasn't the only one I had to learn to trust again. I had to learn to trust myself. I had to trust my own instincts, my own decisions, and my own worth. I had to stop questioning myself, stop wondering if I was somehow at fault for what happened. The truth was, I wasn't perfect. No one was. But I had done my best, and in the end, that was all I could ask for. I began doing things for myself, reconnecting with old passions I had pushed aside. I went back to painting, something I hadn't done in years. I rejoined a yoga class, finding peace in the stillness, the way my body moved through the poses. It wasn't just about healing, it was about rediscovering who I was before all of this happened, the version of me who had been strong and creative and free. I wasn't there yet, but I was getting closer every day. As for Adam, we continued to take things one step at a time. There were days when I felt hopeful, when I could see the person he was becoming, and other days when the scars of the past seemed too deep to overcome. But we were both learning, we were both growing, and that was enough for now. The most important lesson I had learned, though, was that forgiveness was not a destination, it was a journey, and sometimes, it was a journey you had to take alone. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, and others when I felt like I was moving backward. But through it all, I had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging it and choosing to move forward despite it. I didn't know what the future held for me or for Adam. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't defined by the pain of the past. I wasn't defined by the mistakes I had made, or the ones Adam had made. I was defined by my ability to rise above it all. To rebuild, to forgive, and to reclaim the parts of myself that had been lost. And with each day, each moment, I was starting to feel whole again. Not perfect, not untouched by the scars of the past, but whole. The road ahead still held uncertainties. Would Adam and I find a new way to relate to each other? Or would the past always haunt us? Could I fully trust again? Or was that something I'd never fully regain? As I walked forward, I was learning to live with the unknown, trusting that, whatever happened, I had the strength to face it. Months had passed, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, I could feel a new sense of peace settling in my chest. The anger that had once consumed me, the betrayal that had threatened to break me, no longer felt like an all-encompassing force. It wasn't that I had completely forgiven Adam, perhaps I never would, but I had learned how to forgive myself. That was where my healing truly began. I had spent so long in the shadow of Adam's actions, letting the weight of his betrayal define me. I had let my own pain become the center of my life, unable to move forward because I couldn't let go of what had happened. But as time went on, I started to understand that healing wasn't just about holding on to anger to punish someone else. It was about releasing that anger so that I could reclaim my own power. It was about taking back the parts of myself that I had given away in the name of family, trust, and love. It wasn't easy, and I hadn't done it perfectly. There were still days when I woke up feeling like the pain from the past had never left. There were still moments when I questioned my ability to trust again, when I felt the sting of Adam's betrayal cutting through me once more. But I didn't let it paralyze me anymore. I didn't let it dictate my every decision. I let myself feel the pain, acknowledge it, and then let it go. And I had come to realize something important. My past didn't have to define me. It was a part of me, yes, but it wasn't all of me. I had so many other experiences, so many other memories, that weren't tainted by betrayal. I had lived before Adam's actions had shaken my world, and I was learning to live again, even if it looked different than I had expected. It was a slow process, but with each passing day I felt stronger. I had started putting myself first, carving out time for things that made me feel alive again. I took up new hobbies, ones that had always intrigued me, but had been pushed aside in the chaos of my relationship with Adam. I started painting again, not with the same fervor as before, but with a calmness that reflected my own growth. I joined a book club, forcing myself to engage with the world in ways I had shut out before. And in doing so, I rediscovered a piece of myself that had been lost for so long. the independent, creative, fearless version of me who didn't rely on anyone else for validation. I was beginning to remember that I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel complete. One evening, as I stood in front of the easel, my paintbrush hovering over the canvas, I realized something profound. I had spent so much time trying to fix relationships, trying to fix Adam, trying to heal the wounds others had inflicted on me, that I had forgotten how important it was to heal myself. I had been running for so long, trying to outrun the past, trying to fix everything, but I had never stopped to consider what I needed. I had never given myself the time to simply be. As I stood there, painting in the quiet of my apartment, I realized I had finally given myself that space. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I wasn't letting it control me. I had started to paint a new future for myself, one that was free of resentment and anger, one that was full of possibility. But even as I took these steps toward healing, there were still moments when I felt the weight of the past creeping in. One evening, I ran into Sarah at the local bookstore. It had been a while since we had really caught up, and we greeted each other warmly, hugging like old friends. We grabbed coffee together, and as we sat at a small table near the window, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. "So, how are you really doing?" Sarah asked, looking at me with concern in her eyes. I smiled softly. "I'm doing better. I've been working through everything, trying to figure out what I need. It's not perfect, but I'm getting there." "That's good to hear," she said, nodding. "You deserve to heal, Maya. You've been through so much. But you don't have to do it alone." I paused for a moment, reflecting on her words. I had spent so much of my life thinking I needed to handle everything myself, thinking I had to fix everything on my own. But I realized now that healing didn't mean isolation. It didn't mean closing myself off from the people who cared about me. "You're right," I said softly. "I've been learning that. I'm not as alone as I sometimes feel. I have people who want to be there for me. I just have to let them in." That was another thing I was learning, the importance of leaning on others. It wasn't a weakness to ask for help. It wasn't a sign of failure. It was a part of the process, a part of rebuilding the relationships that mattered most. "I'm proud of you, Maya," Sarah said, her voice sincere. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you're getting through it, one step at a time." I smiled at her, grateful for her support, and in that moment I knew she was right. Healing wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about getting everything back to how it was. It was about moving forward with what I had, with the lessons I had learned and the strength I had gained. It was about choosing to keep going, even when it felt hard, even when it felt like the past was too heavy to carry. A few weeks later, Adam and I met again. The conversations we had were no longer filled with tension. There was still an unspoken weight between us, but it had shifted. We had both grown, and the space between us wasn't as vast as it once was. "I've been thinking about something," Adam said, as we sat in the quiet corner of a cafe. "About how things are between us." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" "I know we've been taking things slow," he said, his voice steady. "But I also know that I'm ready to move forward, and I want to be a better person for you. But more importantly, I want to be a better person for myself. And I hope we can figure out how to be in each other's lives, even if it's not the same as before." I listened carefully, taking in his words. It wasn't the perfect apology, but it was the most honest one he had given me. It was clear he wasn't expecting me to forgive him overnight, but he was showing me that he was committed to the process. And that meant something. "I'm not sure what comes next, Adam," I said quietly, feeling the weight of my own uncertainty. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to let you be part of my life again, in whatever way that looks like." He nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you. I don't expect anything from you, but I'm here." As the months continued to pass, I found that the more I focused on myself, the more I gave myself permission to heal, the easier it became to let go of the past, the anger, the hurt. They didn't completely disappear, but they didn't rule me anymore. I was no longer defined by Adam's betrayal. I was Maya, stronger, wiser, and learning to live on my own terms. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I no longer feared it. I no longer felt like I was walking in the shadow of my past. I was walking toward my future, step by step, and I knew I would get there, stronger and more whole than I had ever been before. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to face it. Could I rebuild trust fully, or would the past always linger in the background? Could I move forward without looking back? As I continued to heal and grow, the questions remained. but I was starting to realize that the journey itself was just as important as the destination. As I stood at the edge of my life's new chapter, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. It had been a long, winding road, filled with unexpected twists, painful lessons, and moments of doubt. But here I was, standing in a place of peace. A peace I had fought for, a peace that hadn't come easily, but had come with time, effort, and a willingness to let go of the past. I had learned so much about myself in these months. I had learned about strength, resilience, and vulnerability. I had learned that healing wasn't a straight line. It wasn't about crossing a finish line and being done. Healing was about feeling the pain, acknowledging it, and then choosing to move forward despite it. For the longest time, I had believed that forgiveness meant erasing the past, that it meant letting go of the hurt completely. But I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding a way to live with the pain, to carry it with you without letting it define you. It was about understanding that you couldn't change what had happened, but you could choose how you moved forward from it. And as I looked at my life now, I realized something else. I was no longer the person I had been before everything with Adam had happened. That version of me, the one who trusted without question, who believed that love and loyalty were the foundation of every relationship, was gone. But in her place, there was someone new, someone who had learned from the past, someone who had learned how to protect herself, how to trust herself, and how to rebuild, even after everything seemed broken. I had learned that it was okay to set boundaries. It was okay to take care of myself, even if it meant stepping away from relationships or situations that didn't serve me. I had learned that I didn't need to carry the burden of other people's mistakes. I had carried that weight for too long, thinking that if I could fix others, I could fix myself. But I had learned that healing didn't come from fixing anything. It came from acceptance, accepting the hurt, accepting the lessons, and then moving forward. Adam and I had come a long way since our first conversation after everything had been exposed. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but we had found a way to coexist. We had found a new understanding, a new way to relate to each other. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always comfortable, but it was real. There were days when I still felt the remnants of the betrayal. There were days when I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right choice by trying to rebuild. But those days were becoming fewer and farther between. I was learning to trust him again, piece by piece, and I was learning to trust myself. I was learning to forgive, not because I owed him that forgiveness, but because I owed it to myself. The hardest part was always the fear that trusting again meant making myself vulnerable to more pain. But I had come to realize that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. It was about being honest with myself, about acknowledging my own imperfections, and about letting go of the fear of being hurt. But Adam wasn't the only person I had to rebuild trust with. I had to rebuild trust with myself. For so long I had questioned my own decisions, wondering if I had missed the signs, wondering if I had been blind to the truth. I had blamed myself for not seeing the cracks in our relationship before they shattered everything. But I had come to understand that I had done the best I could with the information I had. And in the end, that was all anyone could do. In the quiet moments, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. I had faced the darkness of betrayal and the weight of anger and hurt. And now, I was learning to step into the light. I was learning to breathe again, to live again, without the constant burden of the past weighing me down. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was enough. I had learned to forgive Adam, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved it. I had learned that holding on to resentment only gave the past power over me, and I wasn't willing to give that power away anymore. Forgiveness wasn't about making the other person feel better. It was about finding peace for yourself, about letting go of the control the hurt had over you. It was about healing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. One evening, Adam and I sat in the same cafe where we'd had so many of our conversations since everything had happened. The place was quiet, the soft hum of conversation filling the space as the sun set outside. We were both quieter than usual, the weight of our shared history still hanging between us, but it didn't feel as suffocating anymore. "I know I don't deserve to ask for anything from you, Maya," Adam said quietly, breaking the silence. "But I just want you to know that I'm grateful. Grateful that you're still willing to try. Grateful that you're still here." I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the regret that still lingered, and the hope that he could prove himself worthy of my trust. "I don't know what the future holds, Adam," I replied, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I don't know where we go from here, but I know that I'm not the same person I was when all of this started. I'm not the person who blindly trusts, but I'm also not the person who's defined by her past. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm starting to trust myself again." He nodded, his expression softening. "That's all I can ask for, and I'll keep proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust. Slowly, but I'll do it." I smiled at him, a small but genuine smile. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense. It wasn't about forgetting the hurt. It was about moving forward together, in whatever way that looked. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope for what could be. Over the next few months, Adam and I continued to navigate the complexities of our relationship. We still had our moments of doubt, our setbacks, but we also had moments of clarity, of understanding, of genuine connection. I didn't expect perfection, but I was learning to embrace the imperfections, to see the beauty in the messiness of life, and to trust that we could both grow from this experience. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time I was okay with that. I wasn't afraid of it. I had learned that healing doesn't mean erasing the past, it means accepting it and choosing to move forward in a way that honors who you are and who you've become. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid of the unknown. What would the future look like for Adam and me? Would we continue to grow together, or would we ultimately part ways, having learned what we needed from each other? Only time would tell. But one thing was for sure. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to handle it.